I mean, this score by Basil Polidoris is one of the best. By the way, if you're ever lifting weights and you want a PR, put on Anvil of Crom.
Yeah.
And your testosterone levels will jump, probably 50 points, and you'll make the lift. Beautiful film score. And yeah, and I think it all goes back to what Milius has crafted with this.
Mm.
And it's Milius, and interestingly enough, written alongside with Oliver Stone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A very young and up and coming Oliver Stone, which is really interesting because politically, I can't think of like two guys more different than very conservative, but almost anarchist. I think he referred to himself as Milius. So maybe they had that in common, but.
And I remember correctly, what I read was that Oliver Stone actually had like written it into like the future, like it was a post-apocalyptic future as opposed to like being in the past or something. But that got scrapped.
That got scrapped, yeah.
Yeah, obviously, but
But it goes back to what we've discussed before. It's a very, very good script, and then it goes from there. And I have to say, I'm kind of rushing to the ending at the beginning of our episode discussing this. It's probably my favorite ending of an Arnold movie. Him climbing up there, cutting the head off the proverbial snake, and chucking it down those steps, and then the fallout. Everybody's just like, "Oh, party's over.
Time to go
home." And you get this the score kind of settles in, and you get these really awesome shots of Arnold on about midway down the steps in contemplative thought of like, his journey of revenge is over. Like, what's next?
Yeah. What do they do now?
And that great scene where the princess, the King Osric's daughter that's been caught up in this cult, she like bows at his, his feet, and he just walks right by her and is like, "No, get up." Like, she's just so conditioned to like wanting to worship like the next thing. And then he leads her off and carries her out. And then obviously you've got that awesome kind of post log with the narrator, the wizard. But yeah, I think it's my favorite ending of a Schwarzenegger picture. It's just very cathartic, and like, I just love that this is like basically an anti-hippie movie, like anti-cult movie. This would be a double feature for me along Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. You want to watch hippie cult leaders get their due, those would be the two films that I would pick.
But so I do want to go back and kind of continue to talk about the ending of this. Is I really, and I noticed it a lot more this time or took stock of it at least, is I love how he, like you said, it brings it full circle of just his revenge, but it also brings it full circle of kind of how he remembers how Thulsa Doom kind of spellbound his mother to then kill her, and then he's able to realize that and stop it. And so it feels like a complete story. Like, it doesn't leave really anything. It feels like he figures out all these gaps, things that were done in the beginning, they come back to, and there's nothing I really feel like just left open. And of course we get a fantastic punching of a camel. That's just glorious. Every time I see it, I laugh. I just think it's the best. It's just which
is honestly a pretty dangerous thing to do. Camels are potentially mean animals. Well, and a couple of years ago, his handler must have been mistreating it because it literally bit his head off and chucked it.
So,
no,
go ahead.
I love everything about this movie. Obviously, I've mentioned the score. I find the cinematography to be excellent.
It's gorgeous. Those vistas.
Yes, and they do cool things. I believe in this one they did it in Conan the Destroyer as well, where they basically use on site. Let me phrase this correctly. It's basically a matte painting that's mobile, that's set up on a stand on location, so that you can take an actual mountain and then put a castle or fortress that's up on it and use it in shot And if the artistry is done right, I know for a fact they do it in the Destroyer, and I think they do it here too. But no, obviously the end scene, they built that thing. They built those steps that and that set. It's probably one of my favorite sets in a movie too. I mean, it's like, oh yeah, you just full on built this thing and then torched it, or at least torched part of it.
It's some of the attention to detail and those kind of the sets just all around it just feel grandiose, but feel part of the same world very well.
Mm-hmm.
Like it all feels real. Though I did get far more of like, I felt like this is like a Genghis Khan kind of
Mm-hmm.
movie as opposed to like, not so much Conan the Barbarian, but like as opposed to like normal medieval Europe. It felt much more like the Highlands and everything else that's going on there.
Yeah, you're right.
So
It
I mean,
does feel like he's in Asia rather than like Europe.
yeah. Well, I mean, and the whole one of my favorite quote of the entire movie of the, Conan, what is best? And he's like, to crush your enemies, to see them driven before you, to hear the lamentation of the women's, which you and I say all the time. My buddy Matt and I say all the time to each other. Like whenever something's good, just like crush enemies,
Crush
but because this is fantastic. But that actually comes from or there's a Genghis Khan quote that is very similar in nature to that. It's not exactly the same, but it just works, So I don't know. I get a little bit of like mixed match. Obviously, I wasn't a huge Conan the Barbarian comic book fan. Didn't really get into the lore so much, so I don't have a whole lot to base off of how accurate this is to to Ronald. My goodness, I forget his last name. But anyways, to the actual creator's vision of what Conan the Barbarian is. But I like it. I think that, again, I think this is fantastic for coming out as early as it did, of having basically unknown actor head this thing who has very little to no true acting chops at this point to, pull it off. Like some of his comic conversations, like I can see this is very young Arnold. He pulls it off, but it's very young, very still learning how to act. I mean, his kind of little conversation with Crom at the Battle of the Mounts, which, by the way, I love the soundtrack. That's my favorite track is the Battle of the Mounds. No joke, in college, my roommate and I would play like Counter-Strike or Pirates, Vikings, Knights, like a bunch of Half-Life mobs and just go at it and kill. And we'd be blasting this full bore on
cool.
repeat.
Yeah.
It's just like, let's do it. Let's just go.